All right, let's get kicked off here in the spirit of trying to keep things timely for you guys. I know it's the holiday season, which is kind of crazy. This year went by crazy quick. For those of you who attended the holiday party in Orange County, thank you guys very much. It was awesome seeing everybody. Let's get this kicked off. So, one of the things we just hijacked the holiday party for 5 minutes to have a quick finance discussion. So for those of you who aren't here, just want to introduce this topic real quick. And because this is a trend that we've been noticing. Colin, can you see my screen, bud?
Yep, all good.
Okay. So one of the things that I've been noticing as a trend is, how do you say this? Breaking down one's finances should be really simple into three separate categories. Number one, make money. Number two, save money. And number three, grow money. Right? It's kind of this simple framework that I think through quite often. And I'm noticing now that there's a gap. A lot of times we talk about the growing money portion. But we very rarely talk about the making money portion and the saving money portion. Now, for those of you who are in retirement, which is probably more people on this call, all three of these, in our opinion, we should think about how do you make them profitable? Because I think what happens oftentimes is far too often the conversation is sort of hijacked by the growing money portion. And that's, okay, what's my return here? But if we start thinking about all three of these categories of how do we make all three of these categories more profitable, right? Your return at the end of the year, right, would be higher if you're thinking about all three of those. So the amount of, as a practical matter, the amount of times where, literally on a weekly basis, where I'm talking to clients and they're just sitting on the savings portion and it's not making any profit for them at all, like zero. And then they want to talk about like, hey, I heard about this new investment here in the growing money portion. And what I want to say is like, time out, time out, time out. You have $500,000 sitting there in a savings account at a credit union that's not doing anything for you. So, and the amazing thing is when you think about the profitable nature of each three of these categories, right, that will usually take care of any return type of questions, if that makes sense. So as an extreme example, I have a good buddy of mine, and I won't say his name just out of respect for him, but every once in a blue moon, he'll tell me about how he made some fancy trade on Wall Street in his personal account, and his return was X.
It could be us.
And it's like, well, okay, but how much money did you put into it? So your return may have been 100%, but if you put $2 in there, who cares? Right. Meanwhile, you have all this cash on the sidelines that you could just be getting a lower return, air quote, like 3.5 to 5%. But the profits can be substantial at the end of the year when you add all of it up, right? When you're totally deploying capital. Colin, what's your take on it, bud?
No, it's a great point. There's dimensions to it, right? And I think the kind of a caveat of the human brain is we like to compartmentalize things and just talk about them one at a time, right? But when people trust us with their retirement, we have to be, and we've said this before, Wes, but we have to be total capital allocators, right? So when I think of your buddy on Wall Street or anybody, the amount of people that I've talked to this year that said, "Hey, should I put some money into Nvidia or should I put some money into cryptocurrency or whatever the hot investment topic of the day is," right? One question that you should ask yourself is, well, how much am I willing to commit to that, right? So when people come to us, they're typically committing their retirement to us, right? So how much would you want us to commit to an Nvidia or a Bitcoin or something like that? Probably, if you start to kind of talk through it and think out loud a bit, it would be a very, very small number relative to your investable assets, right? Because you're not willing to go all in on one company or one cryptocurrency or one whatever, real estate property or whatever it might be, right? So when we're thinking through the lens of total capital allocators, then we insert these dimensions, right? How do we make money, save money, then grow money? And it is a relationship, right? They can all work together. And I love the phrasing, how can we make it more profitable? One area people go to, especially in rising interest rate environments, is, oh, I can get my cash more profitable by using a CD or something like that, which is great. However, what we've noticed this year is people have gotten heavy-handed on this, right? And they want to put more capital towards something that has a limit of 4.5 or 5%, give or take a little bit there, and think that they're winning, overall. Again, could be a place for you to store some short-term cash reserves, but when you overcommit, right, then again, we now make something. We basically reduce the profitability of those dollars, right? Because you didn't really need all of that in cash reserves. You could have had it in other, growth vehicles, longer term investment vehicles, without introducing unnecessary risk to your personal situation.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like just a tweak of words, but I'm telling you, it makes all the difference. Returns are reported as percent, profit are reported generally as dollars. So you want to ask yourself, as you look at your whole balance sheet, how profitable are all of my dollars? And sometimes if you just ask yourself, well, what's the return on those dollars? It might not give the real story. As an example, actually calculating rate of return, the general public actually oftentimes does not do it correctly. As an example, I was talking to a real estate investor, and this guy was pretty sophisticated. He was investing his capital into multi-million-dollar plots of land and then building out these plots of land in themes and then selling them off, like flipping them, and very high end. And he was picking my brain, and he said, "Well," I said, "Well, what's your internal rate of return?" And he said, 22%. And I said, "Okay, interesting. Can you walk me through?" Which is great. I said, "Okay, great. Can you walk me through how you calculated that number?" And what he basically said was he paid a few $1 million for this plot of land, and then he sold some properties and so on. Anyway, long story short, it was 22% over a 6-year period. That is a dramatically different return. So he was doing something, calculating what's called the arithmetic mean for return, not the geometric mean for return. This is a big difference. So when he's going out and sort of evangelizing his returns of 22% per year, that was not true. He's just saying, I started out with this capital a long time ago, and now I have that capital plus 22%. Right? Well, you have to average that out over the 6-year period. And what I told him was like, hey, man, honestly, if you do the geometric mean return, not to get too in the weeds on the mathematics of it, you probably could have invested in treasuries and had a fraction of the risk, right? The same profit and a fraction of the risk. So anyway, not to get too into the weeds here, but it's so important to think about not just the lens of returns, think through the lens of profits. All right, let's change topics here. Back by popular demand is some data visualizations. We're using Visual Capitalist a lot, just like consuming data that way. Just helps tell a really concise story with a ton of data. So we'll go round robin here. And as always, if anybody has any questions, raise your hands, let us know and we can talk about that too. Just wanted to look at the macro state of several topics here. So the first thing is, I thought this was really interesting. Oftentimes people talk about the middle class and how the middle class is getting squeezed. And I just thought it'd be interesting to chat real quick about, okay, well, what actually defines the middle class? And statistically, how are we defining this in our country? So right here, we have a graph of breaking down U.S. household incomes in 2023. And it also shows the percentage of those household incomes and what they're making. I thought this was interesting. So over $200,000 of income, if you make more than that, then that's roughly 14% of the population. 150K to 200K, 10%, 100K to 150K, 17%, 12%, 75K to 100K. So this chart is defining the middle class as 53K all the way up to 160K. I just wanted to level set that data because oftentimes we have discussions about, lower class, middle class, and upper class, and this puts actually some data around it. Joel, what's your perspective, especially as on this call right now, we have people from all across the United States. What's some commentary around this graph?
Well, I think the first thing that jumps at it, if you view this from the eyes of, when we're talking about overall planning, from the eyes of the IRS, anybody making 50 or 1,000 or more is going to be considered wealthy in our country. So when they're talking about all these, all these people out there talking about get the fair share of money from the wealthy people, I think the government's view of who is wealthy and who is not is drastically different than how we feel as individuals. So I think we should be aware of that and very, very cognizant of if they're coming for more fair share, it's a little bit lower income level than you might think. That would be my biggest takeaway from that.
Colin, how about you, buddy?
Well, I think this is a great representation of narrative versus reality, right? The narrative out there is totally different than the actual like the data, right? The underlying numbers of what constitutes as the middle class. It's something that we all fall into, right? It's unfortunately, kind of a curse. But it's easy to look up like, oh, well, it's easy for the people making more than me. They should be the ones paying their fair share, et cetera. I think my dad's spot on, right? When the government or politicians are talking about we need people with money to pay the fair share, I, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're on this call, that's you. Yeah, again, I'm sorry to have to be the one to deliver the message here, right? But they look at you as the wealthy people, right? And certainly if you look at it globally, right, those numbers would drastically be skewed, and no more favorable way to the people on this call, right? Actually, in an unfavorable way, right? So that's actually a pretty sobering chart of what constitutes as the middle class. That median income range was just over $80,000. That's you hear all these numbers talked about, especially like on social medias, or if you ever get on Twitter or X, I guess they call it, or Instagram or Facebook, and you see these threads of people talking about how to make $100,000 and all of this stuff. There's a lot of people out there acting as if they have done this when the numbers are just showing an entirely different story, right? So I would I would maybe pause and take with a grain of salt when people are sharing some of these figures whether it be in the media or at the water cooler at work or wherever it's at. Just know that you guys are the ones. We are all the ones in the scope of what constitutes middle to upper class in this country.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, let's hop on to the next topic. This has been a growing theme for this particular year. And this is not a recommendation for any of these stocks or funds and so on, but it's just to draw out the concept. So if we look at the S&P 500, something that's been really fascinating is this emerging AI tech boom. I don't know how many of you are following this. I love this kind of stuff. Like we are going through an unbelievable, massive revolution right now. I mean, it's literally happening as we speak, and it's going under a lot of people's radar, right? They've kind of heard of AI. And I almost wish it wasn't called AI because it almost brings it to this abstract, like different conversation. Just think of it in terms of extremely advanced and incredibly speedy technology to the point of, I don't know if who on here has the paid version of ChatGPT. I'm going to just demonstrate an example here real quick. Now, this might not seem fancy, but let's think through it. Colin, let me know if you can actually hear this. So I'm going to give a prompt to the paid version, the conversational version of ChatGPT right now. So give me 1 second. Please summarize Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, by the top 5 most profound points.
Certainly. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, explores the psychology of persuasion and outlines 6 key principles. Here are 5 of the most profound. Reciprocity. People feel obliged to return favors or kindnesses. Commitment and consistency. Once people commit to something, they are more likely to follow through.
Can you please add this to a table and number the columns 1 through 5?
Sure. Here's a table with the 5 principles of persuasion from Cialdini's book, Influence.
So the point is, now, if you zoom in on what just happened, this is conversational technology. That I got that answer. By the way, this is a thick book, like this big. I got that answer in what? 3 seconds, to the point where it's now conversationally fluent as well as conversationally fluid, meaning how quickly the response comes. And also, I asked him to, I called him, that's weird. I asked him to put it in a table, and then he does the table, and then I can export the table. That is crazy. Like, think about if I had an intern in here, I would have to tell them, which, by the way, I did give this task to an intern last year. Read that book and summarize the top 5 points for me and put it into a table. And guess what? She never finished it, right? Like, but ChatGPT just did it for me in 7 seconds. This is unbelievable. And if you look at it, so I've been following a bit of the economics on this. So there's something called large language models, and these are incredibly cost prohibitive for most companies to do. Like, it costs a lot of money. So therefore, only the big tech firms can do this. Secondly, you have to have the money and you have to have the engineering capability. So if you look at basically all of the companies who are capable of doing this from a financial resource perspective, as well as from an engineering staffing perspective, they're basically all American companies. So let me pause there.
Wes, what do you think the timeline is for this? Like, because I agree, it is currently happening. When do you think that, like, generally speaking, right? If you walk down the street and you ask somebody about it, just a random stranger, that they would agree, right? It's not only is it happening, because I think everybody on this call would say, like, oh yeah, we've heard enough about it. We understand that it's happening in the background, but it's actually a part of everyone's everyday life, like a cell phone is, for example.
Yeah, well, so number one, I think it's on an exponential curve. So I think the rate of increase is happening dramatically, right? Just as was talking, I asked, you guys can't see this, but I asked ChatGPT to create a chart of US GDP over the last 10 years, and it did it, right? Like, it's unbelievable. Now, the funny thing is, from my recollection, that was not possible 5 months ago.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and the conversational fluency was also not possible like 2 months ago, if my memory serves me correct. This is basically what humans thought the internet was 2 decades ago, right? Like, hey, can I just have access, easy access? But if you didn't know how to ask Google something, which is not exactly like normal English, if that makes sense, you have to phrase it a certain way. Now we have that, where it can correct for deficiencies in being able to communicate with a computer, and it can solve for those deficiencies to the point where you can ask it. And man, I've been playing with this for the last 3-4 weeks. It's unbelievable. So the rate of change is increasing at a dramatic pace. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. I actually think it's going to put everybody who wants to do it, everybody's productivity on a multiple of 5 to 20 from here. And this is not an exaggeration. Again, comparing what I just did when I gave that task to a human last year, the human did not complete it, but I have it done in 17 seconds here on the phone, right? So I actually think it makes humans better, right? Because you now essentially have literally a genius assistant in your pocket. Colin, what's your take?
Yeah.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Hey,
Dan.
Colin,
Sorry, Joel.
can I just, before I forget, and
Yep.
because I'm the oldest of the three, and I'll forget if I don't say this now. I agree with you, Wes. What I think is, like, if someone in my position, a male 60-ish who wants to get out of this business, wants his exit plan at some point in time. I don't want to get out of this business, but that's the average right now. It's by far. That person is not going to learn Chat GPT or any kind of AI. So they're going to be commoditized and either forced out of the business or put out of business, and they're not going to be competitive because of that. Now, I was listening to someone talk about this the other day, just kind of a word of warning. They compared where we are right now is that these AI platforms are like the smartest teenager that you know, right? But if they don't know something, just like a teenager, a smart aleck teenager, if they don't know something, they'll make it up. So you always have to kind of check, checks and balances and against each other, because if you ask a different site the same question, you may get a different answer with different facts. So somebody's making something up there. So there is that form of it. It's really advanced, to your point, Wes. It's growing leaps and bounds. It like from yesterday to today. It's absolutely. But it also still is at the point, if it doesn't know something, it just flat out makes it up and will tell you something. It might not be factual. So you have to be careful about that.
Yeah. So the reason I asked the question is I think that what we just kind of displayed, ask it a question and it give you a pretty robust and pretty in-depth answer on like stuff like that, summarize a book, write a prompt, etc. I think that that's going to get perfected. And by the way, just my opinion here. I think that's going to be perfected in a couple hundred days. Yeah, maybe a couple thousand, right? Tops. Um, I think when people hear that AI word, they think like robots in the house and
I'm all for. I can't wait till that happens.
same. Oh, dude, I'm talking like you want to fold my clothes? Yeah, yeah, 100%. But I think that puts a lot of fear in people's mind, thinking that we're gonna live in some world where I don't recognize it anymore. You know, I grew up in the 70s, I grew up in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s, whatever it was, and I'm not comfortable with that world. I actually don't think that world's as close as some people might fear. Like, I don't think it's 50 years away, but I also don't think it's 5 years away. I do think, however, the refining of the artificial intelligence of basically being a much better version of Google is at our fingertips. I don't think the displacement of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of jobs is anywhere close to us. Um, and I quite frankly, I don't think that there's ever not going to be a time when humans are the top species, at least not in my lifetime, right? And maybe I'll be completely wrong about that, but I actually don't have the fears of, if I were a lawyer, or if I were a CPA, or if I were a financial advisor, or if I were an engineer or something like that, that it's going to take my job in the next year or 2 years. But maybe I'll be wrong.
Yeah, to kind of, I forget, I'm looking up what that's a myth. I forget I think it's called a jobless future myth. I believe it's called. Every time throughout human history there's been a major innovation, there's always that looming, yeah, well, now since we're having that innovation, now nobody's going to be employed. Well, if we just use math to solve that, if we look at today's unemployment rates, I think we're at about 4 point something percent, 4.2, 4.3%. Well, then that mathematically means that those prior assumptions have not been true, right? Because if it were true and all these innovations were putting everybody out of work, then our unemployment rate today would be incredibly high. The example I've used in the past is the barbed wire fence actually, I believe, put cowboys out of business because it reduced the cost of fencing to put cattle in an area. A cowboy would listen to me like, "What? You're explaining this horribly." So I guess like to have cattle stay in a local geographical area, it used to be really expensive to build a wooden fence over however many square miles, or whatever. But now when you have barbed wire, it cuts the cost of that fencing by 95%. Well, then it eliminates the need for cowboys, from my understanding. Now, to be fair to the cowboys, yes, they needed to find another job and they needed to what is called retool. Now, my argument for that is retooling now is 10 times easier and 10 times faster, right? Like, especially, so what I think now the bottleneck is actually just the human's willingness to retool. And now, but the willingness is now meeting the ease of transition, because now you can use the technology that's doing the innovating to help you retool. And I'm sorry, just to entertain myself, I've got to do this one more time, because to understand the potency of this and how it could interact with everyday life, I did this recently. Let's see. What is the best cheesecake in New York City?
It seems like your question got cut off.
Oh, hold on one sec. What is the best cheesecake in New York City?
The debate over the best cheesecake in New York City is fierce. Many locals and visitors rave about Junior's cheesecake, with locations in Brooklyn, Times Square, and beyond. It's known for its creamy, rich texture and classic graham cracker crust. Others argue that Eileen's special cheesecake in Nolita is the true gem. Eileen's has a lighter, fluffier cheesecake and offers a variety of flavors, like raspberry, chocolate, and even pumpkin. If you're into trying something different, Lady M's cheesecake, or spots like Veniero's Pasticceria, famous for Italian-style cheesecake, are also worth exploring. Have you had a favorite so far, or are you on the hunt for one?
So the reason I held out to the end is that last piece. Number one, it obviously provides way more color and texture than a quick Google search, right? It's also pretty wild, the side commentary it adds. I mean, you gotta admit, that's pretty freaky, right? And then, but the final component is the interest, air quotes, interest it has in saying, hey, Wes, give me more information, because I played that game with it before. So then I answer the question, and then it says, oh, okay, then you actually might like this a little bit better. I mean, that is wild. So now I'm using an elementary example here, but imagine what that can do to help support somebody who works in the healthcare space, trying to understand different dimensions of healthcare and disease and so on. Colin, what's your take?
So I was actually just going to take it there, because you guys might, we kind of kicked this topic off with like, hey, we think we're under this big revolution. And then we ask it about cheesecake in New York City. It's like, well, maybe that doesn't, move the economic needle for America for the next 50 years. But if it cures cancer, right? Or if it cures autoimmune diseases, or if it cures Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or things like that, because we can use the computing power of these machines to run the algorithms and try to solve these things. And eventually it stumbles upon an answer, and then, you take it to labs and you study it and you test it out, and then you figure out what would have taken humans another 5, 10, 20 decades to figure out, but it figures it out in a matter of months or a matter of days. Yeah, that's the in my opinion, the large needle mover here. When you start taking it to industries like the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, education, finance, et cetera, right? I think that's the big, the ultimate like golden ticket with artificial intelligence. One more comment on that. I don't know that the economic impact is on the very short term horizon either. I think that's probably more of like a 5 to 10 year thing too. But again, I might be way off on that. I think these big companies are spending and burning a ton of money trying to kind of win the arms race right now. But again, I don't see. I think we're very, very fortunate that it's happening here in America.
Oh yeah,
I'll just leave it at
no
that.
doubt about
Yeah.
it.
John asked a great question. I think John made a great point. He said, how do we know that answer wasn't just made up? I think that's the key right now. It's like when you're asking it about cheesecake, that's one thing, or asking it to, design an itinerary for your vacation, that's one thing. We can, if it's wrong, there's no real ramification to that. If you're asking it to design a investment portfolio that will take you through the rest of your entire retirement, I think we then have to start. That's where the human element of, discernment and actual experience and planning come in. That's still not there in that scenario, and I think that's where that's the big fear from the securities industry, is that people will start asking those questions and taking those answers as gospel and putting it into place, and then there's no ramification if it's wrong 10 years from now.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, when I'm speaking from the lens of like total productivity over all of the companies we're all invested in. I mark my words, there will not be a company on the planet who actually wants to compete if they believe, oh well, I can't trust this technology. Well, then just get ready to get smoked. Like you're done. There's no. It's the same thing as like, oh well, I don't want to use a computer in the company. It's like, okay, cool. Well, congratulations, because you don't want to run the company anymore, right? It's just not possible. It's like a home builder saying, I want to use a hammer. I refuse to use a nail gun. That's crazy, right? Like now, John, to your point, I just want everybody to know that, like, of course, like there's obviously room for error here, but also at the same time, are there going to be things that just don't make sense to ask? If like, hey, hey, ChatGPT, what's the right diet for me, right? There's so many other things, like it's the precision has to come in, and then the evolution of the person. Hey, what's the right diet for me today is very different than what's the right diet for me next week, the next year, next month, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So use it for what it is. I look at it as getting information back 100 times faster, literally. And that's what we all just experienced. You might, if you zoom in on it, right? Not only did it give me the answer of what I was looking for, it was giving me side commentary and different texture that historical encyclopedia searches did not give. Even historical Google searches did not even come anywhere close to giving. So I would urge everybody to consider, like, how do you partner with this? Use this as like your supplement to get smarter, to make decisions faster. Colin, what's your final take on this, bud?
Yeah, I mean, and we just asked it a pretty subjective question. Who's the best cheesecake? Well,
Yeah.
everyone on here might have a different answer. Right? I'm going to ask it, how do I win an argument with my wife? And then we'll see if we'll see if how good
great
it.
for that too.
Yeah. How well that works, right? No, I agreed. I would think of it like a the best like the most speedy executive assistant, right? Helper to the human that you could possibly think of. I don't even think the sci-fi movies 20 and 30 and 40 years ago had dreams this big, right? This stuff is unbelievably powerful. We're using it, right? Yeah, I interact with ChatGPT every single day. I'm with you, John. I can't take it at face value, but you know, I can't take Google searches at face value either. You know, I've definitely Google searched, you know, Yelp reviews of restaurants or whatever, and thought I was going to a great restaurant, and it was wrong, right? So there is going to be subjectivity to it. I think where the human is always, or at least for a long time, going to have um, a role is the how to decipher it, right? And how to apply the information that it provides to you. And it's just going to get it to you that much quicker. What I can say though, to that question, when Wes asked to give a book review of Influence by Robert Cialdini and give us the five takeaways. I know we didn't go through it all, but the one that we did here was reciprocity. And the only reason we know this is because we're all super big fans of that book. Reciprocity is one of the more profound takeaways from the book. It, in my opinion, absolutely nailed it, right? And if we probably let it play out, my guess would be that it would have also communicated four additional points that were definitely big takeaways from the book, right? So we, just because we've all read the book, we kind of can cross-reference that one and see, you know, how accurate was it. Reciprocity, and, you know, go listen to Robert Cialdini interviews. He'd probably tell you that that's number one. So,
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And like anything else, right? Like, so this is it to oversimplify it. It's a data aggregator. So it's not, you know, are there times where it could be wrong? Of course, right? But it's going and plucking data from a whole bunch of other data aggregators. And you're just funneling this all up, and then it's using probabilistic determination and saying, okay, well, hey, I'm making this up, but hey, I checked Yelp reviews, I checked Google reviews, I checked other sites, and it seems like these are the companies for the cheesecakes that came up, and like, here's what came up the most, right? So just doing that calculation at a crazy fast level. Now, at its core, what I think is interesting is one of the conversations that is a subcategory of AI is energy. So I want to transition into this topic, last final topic. For some reason, this energy conversation gets sort of like too entangled in political conversation, which kind of drives me crazy. But anyway, I want to show this chart because I think it's a really cool chart. You can see where the energy distribution is coming from, and I think it's really interesting, and we can have a unique commentary on it. So let me share my screen right here. Okay, again from the Visual Capitalist, U.S. energy use by source and sector. This is in quads 2023, and if you're wondering what quads are, it's measured in British thermal units in quadrillions, which I didn't even know was a real number. So let's take a look here. So at the top, you have petroleum, natural gas, renewables, coal, and nuclear. And then the amount of units, right, that each one of those carries. I just think this is really fascinating because assuming this data is true, you can see the asymmetries of where our energy is coming from. And then what's even cooler is down here at the bottom, you can see, okay, well, where of that energy, how is it spliced? Okay, we can see that transportation, right? A certain amount is obviously being fueled by petroleum. Another certain amount is being fueled by renewables. And I just thought this was really interesting. And I also think it's interesting to not only think about it from an investment perspective, but also to think about it from a current state perspective, a historical state perspective of like, it wasn't too long ago where only 2 of these were fueling everything, right? And then we start to add more categories of where we can get our energy from. So historical state, current state, and then also to think about how this chart is going to change in the future state. So I've got some comments on that, but let me pause. Let me throw the mic over to you, Joel. What's your take, buddy?
I think you're spot on there. I think that we're changing, that change is slow, just simply because, well, we've done it for so long using petroleum-based energy and natural gas now that it's a hard transition to make. But obviously, we're in the process of making that transition, which is going to make us more efficient as a country going forward. I think nuclear has maybe some of the most potential, and we'll probably see that coming along because the negativity around the nuclear energy process is disappearing, I think, and we're going to, and it's the one that probably has the biggest upside potential.
Yep, I agree to that. Colin, what's your take, buddy?
Yeah, I would say short term. And yeah, you're right, dude. This does get so political so quickly. I believe that because of the regime change, we will get back to drilling and drilling pretty heavily in this country, and it actually be very beneficial short term. I think long term, if my memory serves me correct, and again, I hate to start bringing up these politicians' names because it gets like there's like religious wars over it, but if I think back on it, I hope I'm remembering this correctly. I believe when Trump was in office his first term, I believe their administration was actually kind of like in the red zone, maybe like on the 1 yard line of finalizing some sort of nuclear deal with China, but then COVID happened, um, and it kind of got nixed, and put on the back burner. My hope is that we as a country take this very seriously, and I think we are, take this very seriously because we talk about the national debt in our classes, in our conversations with you guys personally quite a bit. You're probably not getting out of 34 trillion, $35 trillion of national debt. Probably the more realistic path forward is America growing at 4 and 5 and 6% into the future, as opposed to stagnant around, 2 or 3% like it's been the past 20 years. Cheaper energy, more access to energy. And by the way, all of these LLMs that Wes was talking about, the artificial intelligence, it takes a large amount of energy to have this type of computing power. So if we want to win the AI race, if we want America to still be the superpower 20 years from now, those 2 things, energy and artificial intelligence is kind of the arms race here. And if we unlock those, and still take seriously what got the girl that we took to the dance, right? The natural gas, the petroleum style energy. I think we're set up for a pretty massive boom in our country over the baby boomers' golden years, which is super impactful to our clients.
Yeah, and what also, I know I have said this many times before, there's a phenomenal book called The Rational Optimist that I highly recommend everybody read, because it talks about there's always going to be an Armageddon narrative running through the veins of society because humans can get distracted or are attracted in a weird way to negative news and so on because of, evolutionary purpose reasons from my understanding. So, but the problems that have existed in any markets and have not been solved yet doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, I would say it probably does not mean that they're not solvable. It means that the incentive infrastructure has not been aligned to properly incentivize the people to solve that problem yet, right? As an example, if we look at this chart for batteries, right? So right now it's incredible. Actually, as I talk about this, it's amazing how much of a nerd I am and how much my girlfriend is correct, because what's going on in batteries right now is fascinating. So you almost have going on in the battery technology now what went on when Thomas Edison created the light bulb. And what he basically did, Edison created, right? So Edison basically just by trial and error was testing different materials for the elements, the filaments inside of a light bulb. And it's like, okay, try this one, it exploded, right? Try this one, it caught on fire. Tried this one, didn't work until finally we found something. We are going through something very similar in the battery world right now. We are now trying different types of materials, and there's like an energy race, a battery race going on as we speak to find different materials to increase the capacity and the duration at which we can store energy. And this is the underlying fuel for everything, right? America and other developing world countries have always been in an arms race of energy, and that arms race still exists today. So it's very fascinating because I find in cocktail party arguments, it's like, yeah, but batteries are inefficient. It's like, no, 10 years ago, the batteries were inefficient. Today, they're not as efficient as they will be 5 years from today, because now we finally have the incentive infrastructure that's aligned, where the economics has now been commoditized to the point where these things are now within striking zone, right, of being financially feasible. So, in my view, it is important that America continue the fight and try to be number one in not only in energy distribution and usage, in energy storage. So when I look at this chart right here, this is battery capacity. It's, again, how proud I am to live in the country where we are, because yet again, we are on the top 3 list of a new innovation. And this one is battery storage. So China being at 27.1 capacity gigawatts, and then 15.8 for the US. I hope I'm using the right units there. But you get to see, right, like who's in the lead again. And this is not a brag as an American. It's more of like gratitude to be an American. Colin, what's your take?
Yeah, that's fascinating. The Chinese, for as problematic as it might look from across the pond, they they take this stuff very, very seriously, right? And when everyone has this fear of like, oh, artificial intelligence or nuclear energy or insert whatever fear, it's not that somebody won't create it or somebody won't innovate and capitalize on it. It will happen. It's almost an inevitability, right? I think the better question to ask is, who do we want to win that race,
Yep.
right? You might not love Elon Musk, but would you rather him be the battery king of the world, or would you rather the Chinese Communist Party be the battery kings of the world, right? Because somebody will be. In my opinion, the better question to ask ourselves is, who do we want to win this arms race? So again, as political as this can get, and I don't want to take it there, right? I agree. The gratitude that we should have to be towards the top of all of these lists is very, very important. Because if we're not, that means somebody else is, and we better be sure that we like whoever that actor is. And in a lot of instances, that might not give us the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah. Joel, what's your take, bud?
Yeah, no, I agree with Colin. I think we better be careful who wins this race, and I think we should be thankful that Elon Musk is in our country and on our side, because eventually he will figure it out. And again, this is just the beginning. So as all these things happen, I think still looking out across the world, we have a lot of warts and a lot of issues in our country, but we still are the most innovative, cutting edge country in the world. And I think that just is a very good sign for all of us on this call,
Right.
as Americans.
Absolutely. And the reason I kind of wanted to direct this conversation towards these topics is because, again, your investments are not just some ticker symbol that's jumping up and down on your phone, or some just text on your statement that you receive on a monthly or quarterly basis, and whether or not that's up or down from the prior month's, valuation. We have to remember that what's going on every single second, literally, of the day inside of your investments is productivity, is an incentive to innovate. And I just want to reintroduce making capitalism cool again, right? Like a Steve Jobs would say. Because oftentimes we get caught up in the political nonsense. We get caught up in like the being negative. And it's like, I get it. Capitalism has its downsides. But be careful about, how would you say this? Be careful about being negative towards capitalism while you're typing that text message to somebody. That is an oxymoron, right? Like you're complaining about innovation while you're using one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology humans have ever had in human history. So it's to remember that while many people on this call might be retired currently, but you still have literally so many organizations and humans trying to solve problems that were historically impossible, and they are solving those problems, and as a result, they and you are being compensated from it directly from your investments. Colin, final words of wisdom, buddy.
Yeah, well, we could have probably talked about what I'm going to mention here the entire call. But with this being our last roundtable of the year, I went back and reviewed the banks on Wall Street's predictions for the S&P 500 for 2024. So at the end of last year, all the big banks, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Citibank, USB, et cetera, they all made predictions on where the S&P 500 would end up at the end of 2024. The closest prediction as it stands today was 16% to the downside, to incorrect, right? Not even close, right?
Yeah.
The highest prediction was that the S&P would end the year around 5,200. Currently, it's trading over 6,000, right? And I only say this because we're all about to go to holiday parties and sit next to nieces and nephews or brothers and sisters or aunts and uncles or grandparents, whatever it is. And inevitably somebody's going to bring up, oh, I think that if I time the market this way or I get into this investment, these banks on Wall Street have some of the smartest people and basically unlimited resources to try to guess where the price is headed in the short to medium term, and they fail to the extent of multiple years of returns, right? So I just say that to once again take us back to what we're investing in. It's not short-term price speculation, right? That is a fool's game. The brightest people in the industry with unlimited resources didn't even get within 10% this year. They weren't close, right? They were so far off. And it's just some more social proof to reinforce you want productive assets, with a long-term time horizon in nature. And anyone trying to tell you that they could get in and get out of the market or buy this, then sell that. Yeah, great question, Sandy. What did ChatGPT say? I don't know. Would have been interesting, right? Would have been interesting to follow up on that, right? But yeah, I'll stop preaching now. But it's once again a good lesson as to why trying to time the market is a fool's game.
Yeah, 100%. Joel, final words of wisdom, buddy.
Final words that Colin just mentioned. This is the last Zoom roundtable of the year. So I think before we end this year, I think we should all just let you guys know how incredibly grateful we are for all of you. And we never want to take advantage of the trust that you put into us. And we're going to do everything we can, not only for the rest of this year, but for the foreseeable future, to keep earning that trust and make sure that you guys are in the best possible position.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys as always. I'm in the same boat, like how incredibly grateful we are. And honestly, those of you, I know many of you who come to these monthly meetings come religiously. And I personally think it should be all of our leaders' jobs of our families, a moral obligation to educate ourselves, because it's almost impossible to lead without education. And specifically when it comes to the world of investing, the amount of misinformation that's transferred out there just at the cocktail parties, right? And somebody kind of claiming to know or pretending to know what they're talking about without actually doing the research. So I appreciate you guys actually showing up to these things, because I know they can be boring and tedious and yada, yada, yada. But the reality is, like, this is what helps you make better decisions for you and your family, and then for your friends when you talk to them and so on. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. We love you. Have a great Christmas. If you need us in the meantime, just give us a call. Thanks, guys. Bye.